Welcome, everybody, to the Worldstone Keep podcast. This is episode 16. We're coming right off of our live show, which was 2 weeks ago, I believe. The 15th show. If you haven't seen that, you can check it out at theworldstonekeep.wordpress.com. That was a pretty good show. This show is going to be a little different from our traditional non-live show. We're going to skip Diablo 2 stuff this week because we got a lot of news to talk about. Quite a bit after the conference call, the investor conference call between Activision and Blizzard, which I listened to the whole thing, and it was pretty boring, but there's some good stuff in there. Not to mention the Diablo 3 team released some new screenshots, concept art, and stuff like that we'll talk about too. So we're going to start out with lore. Well, actually, we'll start out with the interview question of this week, and then we'll jump into lore and then cover the news and close out the show. So for this week, this one comes from Chick. What kind of music do you listen to, and what is your favorite? So whoever wants to jump in and take this one first, go for it.
I'm more of a rock alternative person myself. Favorite's kind of hard to pick. I would say old school Linkin Park's pretty high on up there, though. What about you guys?
Favorites is hard. I listen to all different kinds of music, from like rap, rock, weird stuff to, I don't know, tons of different stuff. Some of my favorite bands, though, Tiger Army, it's kind of like rockabilly, psychobilly stuff. What else we got? I like Jay-Z a lot, Wiz Khalifa. Those are my main rap guys, probably the only ones I listen to, mostly. I don't like a lot of rap. It's very specific. Yeah, that's about it.
I like Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez.
Oh, God, I'm kicking you off the show. Go away.
What, man? What do you got against the Biebs? Never say never.
Oh, no. Get out of here. Oh, dude, I was editing this wedding yesterday at work. The groom had to be like in his 50s, the bride in like her early 20s, and he was rocking like the Bieber hair. I was like, wow, dude, there's something seriously wrong with you.
The Biebs haircut is like $750 a cut.
Oh my God.
You don't mess around with the Biebs cut.
So terrible.
Wow.
So terrible.
But in all seriousness, more of a rock guy-ish. I don't know. I like Our Lady Peace. They're pretty good.
I have not heard of them. I'll have to check them out.
That's right. You're American. Take it.
Are they Canadian?
No, they're a good Canadian band. Yeah, no, I like a lot. I have a wide range of genres I listen to.
Yeah, me too.
One of which is actually not Justin Bieber. I don't have anything against the kid. He's just not my cup of tea.
Dan's here in spirit. We're having audio issues with him, so he might come in later, he might not. We'll find out. But that'll do it for interview questions since he's not here right now. So let's jump into lore because I want to get to news. So let's do it. What do we got for lore this week, Jordan?
Okay, lore, we got the end of Book 4, the finalization of this whole series we got going on with Book 4, and trying to pick up exactly where we left off of memory, so bear with me. Immediately after Norik, the main character, and Kara Night Shadow were expelled from the Arcane Sanctuary, they, are trying to figure out what to do when Zazak shows up, pretty much stabs her in the chest, and that's gonna be it for her. He was actually aiming for Norik. She jumps in the way, but, he couldn't move. The armor wouldn't let him. So she's pretty much down and out, pretty much guaranteed to die.
Right.
And, he wants to do something, but he can't. And Zazax is just kind of like, well, this is unexpected. And so he's, trying to figure out the circumstances. He's like, hey, armor. You want to be reunited? Yeah? All right, then. We're going to go this way. And so Norik marches off against his will, as usual.
That poor bastard.
And, Zazax, of course, wants the armor to be reunited, essentially, on his puppet, in this case being, the general. And little does he know that the entire time the armor still has its own motivations. It's not going to just, follow suit, as you could say, but that comes just a touch later. While she's dying, the two revenants show up, and a bit of her life force, because, the dagger is tied to her. Mm-hmm. And they were told to give it back to her. And of course, one of the two, is the one that can talk, is actually like, oh man, I wish I could just use it and come back to life. And he's like, I know it wouldn't work on me anyway, but shut up. I don't care. Sucks. So he gives it to her, and she basically heals over from the brink of death and is restored. And she's having a little bit of a conversation with them and finally realizes what their true intent was. And you finally get in on a little bit of what was actually going on with the pair of them. And the entire time they weren't looking for revenge against Norik at all. They were simply tracking the armor. So at this point, you're just kind of like, well, what's their motivation? Why do they care?
Right.
They're not necromancers, they're not demons, they're not, anything but would-be adventurers. They kind of got caught in the crossfire.
Mhm.
So, there's still a little bit more. Norik, of course, arrives back with Zazax, talking to, basically the general, because after all this time, the armor's finally about to be reunited. The city's still under siege. They're about to fall, shatter the gates and everything else. So, pretty critical time. What's really fascinating is you have this little bit of a dialogue going on between Norik and the general, these probably a couple removed over cousins that kind of share their own little intentions, but to the surprise of probably everyone, when the general comes down with his, black sword created by the armor, the helmet piece that he has,
Mhm.
the armor responds and blocks it.
Hmm.
And he says, well, it looks like it's not going to give it to you after all. It's like you're just going to have to fight it. So then they have a showdown, both with their own magically created ebony black flaming sword, just really epic display, you might say, and they're going at it. But by this point, Norik still doesn't have any control over the armor. He's completely strung up like a puppet.
Mhm.
And the whole time he's getting really upset because he understands the fighting style of the general because he too grew up, in the Western Kingdom.
Right.
He already knows their fighting style. And he also knows that the armor, because it was completely based on the Warlord of Blood, who was a Vizjeri, he also knows their fighting style because of his companion who was killed. And so he knows exactly how both sets are working at the same time and knows a few counter moves for each set.
Mhm.
So he really wants to jump in, but he can't.
Yep. That sucks.
And when he starts losing and just very narrowly escaping some of it, he realizes he finally does have control.
Oh.
And when he starts to get a foothold and starts winning, General cheats a little bit. He uses his other hand to cast a spell and kind of blast his face a little bit, throw him off guard, and, get the upper hand. The entire time, Zazax is standing over watching the fight going, if this doesn't turn out the way I need it to, this will be very, very, very bad for me.
Mhm.
Because Belial is not going to forgive this shit. So, even though it's not fair fighting, I'm going to stab Norik just at the right time. The general will just have to get over it.
Oh, poor bastard Nork, man. Always getting shafted.
That's right. So they're going at it. They're going back and forth, wrestling on the ground and everything else. And when Zazax is ready to pounce, he gets stabbed in the back by the necromancer's dagger, just lodged really deep.
Oh.
And just burning, writhing pain, because this is, no ordinary attack.
Right.
And it's just burrowed in there, and he's trying to claw the thing out. And Kara knows that as long as the dagger's in his body, he'll be even more susceptible to her spells. And in the very heat of it, the last thing that she manages to cast, even though it isn't lethal, was essentially Terrify. In other words, he is overcome with whatever, he feared most, and in this case being, an angelic presence looming over him with a flaming sword.
Mm.
Even though some part of him knew that it wasn't real, knew that it couldn't possibly, he was still overcome with fear and he had to run away. Just the most stunning visual in your head type stuff.
Crazy.
Yeah, so, he takes off. She knows it's pretty much a draw, but if she had seen it to its final conclusion, she might not have won anyway.
Mhm.
So it just have to do. In the midst of the fighting between the two, Norik actually ends up losing his sword. It flying away, and the general takes hold of it. So now he's got two swords. Norik has none. And you see this kind of strange look over his face in kind of the final moments. He's distracted for just the briefest moments. And Norik actually causes the sword to dematerialize out of his hand and back into his own.
Whoa.
And stabs him, knowing that the sword actually belonged to his set, not the other.
Wait, he stabbed the general with it or himself?
No, the general.
Oh. Crazy.
Actually ends up winning the fight that way. And Norik actually, having won the fight, really starts to feel more or less like Bartuk did. And it starts to overtake his mind. He takes the helmet and he starts to put it on, and the second he tears it off of Malvolin's head, he screams in utter pain, as though you just ripped his head off.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, it's not attached, it's, just the attachment to the armor itself.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Taking a piece of his soul.
Yeah, it was that kind of moment. And when Nort goes to put the helmet on, Kara's trying to talk him down, trying to stop him from doing it, but he can't really help himself. And when he actually puts it on, the two Revenants, his former friends, pretty much tackle him and hold him down and say, "I'm sorry, buddy, we just got to do this," and take the helmet off of him. And of course, he pretty much has the same reaction. And then off in the distance, you see the impersonator, the imposter, the Horizon that wandered into the Arcane Sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
He's no longer acting crazy or anything. He's very clear, very concise, and acting on pure behalf of Horizon himself. And kind of gives him this little speech about how blood calls to blood. It's time to end this, and causes each piece of the armor to fly to him and essentially bind to his body instead.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a quote I put in here, and this is one of the things that he said after the fact. "The Arcane Sanctuary exists in many places, has many doorways, but I advise you not to I advise you now to never seek it again." In other words, you go into the Arcane Sanctuary, you wander in, it's pretty much bound to end badly.
Right.
I mean, that Vizjeri mage that was saying this was a good example. Completely lost his mind and was overtaken with the memories and everything else of Horizon. And what you also find out in this little revelation is that Horizon himself never actually died. As his body began to, essentially give in to old age, he eventually replaced every part of his body with the Arcane Sanctuary itself, and actually became the Arcane Sanctuary.
What?
Yeah.
Trippy.
So, yeah, when you're actually in the Arcane Sanctuary, realize that you were actually in, Horizon to that measure.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And the only other thing is that, the two Revenants have finally completed their task, and you realize that it was an angel who was behind everything. And one of the two that can actually still talk is just like, he's kind of bad-mouthing the angel. He's like, "Even now you won't show yourself." Always acting like you're above everything. And they're enveloped in this blue light, just as in the very beginning, when they were in the crypt, there was a blue light.
Mm-hmm.
So it's constantly pointing to Tyrael, but it never actually says so.
Oh.
And in the very final part, the epilogue, Zazax is more or less wandering out in the desert, trying to get his strength back, trying to heal his wound that is still, kind of trailing this black ooze that comes out of him.
Gross.
And he's trying to save face and figure out what his next move is going to be. Oh, I did leave one part out. After the general was defeated, at some point during the fighting, he had given the order that, or just before the fighting rather, that they could pretty much do whatever they wanted to Luke Ghislaine. They just wanted to murder, pillage, and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So once that fight was over, Nort cast them out. In other words, all of the bodies were completely devoid of anything after that. The thing about it was, and in the epilogue, Zazax explains this, that the demons weren't strong enough. They weren't, fully materialized, as it were. They would have needed more time. And to put it in human terms, it would be like giving birth to a child prematurely. Only the very strongest would have survived.
Right.
So his plan was to go out and collect the survivors and send them back to hell. And, kind of hope that would appease Belial a little bit. And he's still, maybe hearing little or seeing little traces of things. And he's like, okay, I'm finally over this Terrify spell. There's no more angel stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And he hears this voice in his head, like really clearly, like not like anything else. And by the time he realizes what it actually is, it's already too late. That